Right now, you are probably the least cognitively capable version of a human that has ever existed, not because you're lazy, not because of your diet, not because of your phone, because of something that happened to your brain over the last 10,000 years that nobody told you about, and the science is not subtle about this. Your ancestors, the ones living 50,000 years ago, walking across unknown continents with no maps, no tools, no language written down anywhere, outperformed modern humans in almost every measurable cognitive category: memory, pattern recognition, navigation, environmental awareness, problem solving under pressure. All of it better then, and we know exactly when it started going wrong and why. Let's start with what intelligence actually is. Because when most people hear smarter, they think test scores, IQ, the ability to solve equations or recite facts. But that's not what intelligence is. That's what intelligence looks like when it's been domesticated. Real intelligence, the kind that kept your ancestors alive for 300,000 years, is about reading the world. A hunter-gatherer in the Kalahari Desert can look at a patch of dry ground and tell you which animal walked across it, how long ago, what direction it was heading, whether it was injured, and roughly how far ahead it is. No modern human can do that without years of dedicated training. And even then, not as fast. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that indigenous trackers can detect and interpret environmental signals that trained scientists using instruments literally cannot perceive. The information is there. The modern brain just doesn't process it. Because it was never asked to. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The human brain is the most energetically expensive organ in the body. It burns roughly 20% of your total caloric intake just to stay on. Evolution doesn't keep expensive things around unless they earn their cost. For 300,000 years, your brain earned it. Every single day, it was solving problems that required full capacity. Find food, navigate terrain, read weather, track animals, remember which plants were safe, manage complex social hierarchies, build shelter before nightfall. The brain was being pushed, constantly, by reality. And then, roughly 10,000 years ago, we invented agriculture, and the brain stopped being pushed. Not immediately, not dramatically, slowly. When you don't need to remember where the food is because the food is in the field outside your door, that skill degrades. When you don't need to navigate because you live in the same village your entire life, that ability weakens. When specialists handle the things you used to solve yourself, your brain quietly redistributes the resources. Use it or lose it. That's not a motivational phrase. That's literally how neuroplasticity works. In 2010, a team of researchers from Cambridge compared the skeletal remains of ancient hunter-gatherers with those of early farmers from the same region, just a few thousand years later. The hunter-gatherers had significantly larger and more robust bone structures, more muscle attachment points, the kind of physical architecture that comes from a body and a nervous system being constantly, fully engaged with the physical world. The farmers were smaller, weaker, and their skulls showed something unexpected. The average brain volume of early agricultural humans was measurably smaller than that of the hunter-gatherers who came before them. The human brain has been shrinking for 10,000 years. By some estimates, we have lost a volume of brain tissue roughly the size of a tennis ball compared to our pre-agricultural ancestors. Let that sit for a second. Now, scientists debate what brain size actually means for intelligence. Volume is not a direct proxy for capability. A smaller, more efficiently wired brain could theoretically outperform a larger one, but here's what the data actually shows. Working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate multiple pieces of information simultaneously, has been measurably declining in populations with access to external memory storage. Why remember something your phone remembers for you? Spatial reasoning, the ability to mentally navigate and rotate three-dimensional environments, has dropped sharply in populations that grew up using GPS rather than learning to read physical space. Why build an internal map when the screen always knows where you are? And language. The average vocabulary of an English speaker in 1950 was significantly larger than it is today. Not because people in 1950 were reading more complex books. Because they were exposed to less media that optimized for the lowest common denominator. In every cognitive domain where technology stepped in to do the work, the human brain stepped back. This is not a coincidence, and here's the part that doesn't make it into the headlines. It's not just about what we've lost, it's about what we never developed. Your ancestors had forms of cognition that modern humans genuinely cannot access anymore because the environments that produced them no longer exist. Ethnobotanists working with indigenous communities in the Amazon have documented individuals who can identify over 800 plant species by sight and describe their medicinal properties, seasonal behaviors, and ecological relationships from memory. That's not a skill, that's a cognitive architecture, built over a lifetime of full immersion in a complex living system. No modern human builds that architecture. Because no modern human lives inside that system. We don't just know less. We have become less capable of certain kinds of knowing. There's a term for this in cognitive science: cognitive offloading. When an external system reliably performs a cognitive task, the brain treats it as part of itself. It integrates the tool, and then it stops maintaining the internal version. Your calculator is now part of your brain, so is your GPS, so is your search engine. The problem is not that the tools are bad. The problem is that using a tool to think is not the same as thinking. And the brain that stops thinking in a particular way stops being able to think that way. Now here's the layer most people never reach when they talk about this. It's not just individual brains degrading in isolation. It's happening at the level of culture, at the level of collective intelligence. For most of human history, knowledge was stored in people, not books, not databases. People. A single elder in a hunter-gatherer band might carry decades of accumulated environmental knowledge, migration routes, seasonal food sources, the behavior of weather systems, the location of water during drought, medical knowledge passed down through generations of direct observation. When that person died, that knowledge had to be transferred, verbally, directly, into another human mind. This created enormous pressure to maintain memory as a living system. You couldn't afford to forget, there was no backup. Oral cultures developed memory techniques that modern humans have almost entirely abandoned. The method of loci, mentally placing information inside imagined physical spaces to retrieve it later, was not a trick. It was standard cognitive infrastructure. Indigenous Australians used songlines, vast mental maps encoded in narrative and music, stretching thousands of kilometers across a continent, holding navigational, ecological, and cultural information across generations. A single songline could carry more functional environmental data than a modern field researcher could collect in years, and it lived entirely inside a human mind. We don't build those structures anymore. We don't have to. And because we don't have to, we can't. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. In 2019, a paper published in PNAS tracked reaction times and processing speed across a sample of over 1 million people spanning a century of data. Processing speed, the raw rate at which your brain can evaluate and respond to new information, has been declining since the early 20th century. The researchers proposed several explanations: chronic sleep disruption, sedentary lifestyle, nutritional changes, environmental toxins. All of these are real contributors. But underneath all of them is the same root mechanism. A brain that is not being used the way it was built to be used will not perform the way it was built to perform. And here's the part that makes this more than just an interesting problem. Your brain does not know it is degrading. Your brain does not know it is degrading. Cognitive decline is largely invisible from the inside. The brain is extraordinarily good at confabulating, at generating confident explanations for things it no longer fully understands, at filling gaps with plausible-sounding noise, at mistaking familiarity for comprehension. You feel smart. You are surrounded by tools that make you feel smarter. Your phone answers questions in seconds. Your GPS never gets lost. Your search engine finds anything. You feel more capable than any human who ever lived. And in some narrow, specific, tool-dependent ways, you are. But remove the tools. Stand in an unfamiliar landscape with no signal, no map, no stored food, and nothing but your own cognitive capacity. Your ancestors would survive that. Most modern humans would not last a week. That gap is not a technology gap, it's a cognition gap. And it has been quietly widening for 10,000 years. So what do you do with this? Because this is not a video about going back. You cannot go back. Agriculture is not optional. Cities are not optional. The cognitive infrastructure of modern civilization is not something you can simply uninstall. But you can understand what you are losing. and you can choose, deliberately, to push back against it. The research on this is actually encouraging. Studies on memory athletes, people who train using ancient techniques like the method of Loso, show that the human brain retains the full capacity to build extraordinary memory structures. It just needs to be asked. Studies on people who regularly navigate without GPS show preserved and even enhanced hippocampal volume, the brain region responsible for spatial memory, compared to people who rely entirely on external navigation. Studies on communities that maintain oral storytelling traditions show measurably stronger working memory and narrative processing than populations that have shifted entirely to written and digital communication. The most complex organ in the known universe will quietly downgrade itself the moment you stop giving it something real to solve. Your ancestors were smarter than you, not because they tried harder, because they had no other choice, and you do.